Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my top 50 running back rankings for a full PPR scoring format as we approach our 2024 fantasy football draft. Because it was so highly requested, I thought I might as well go ahead and make another rankings update at the running back position, but this time in a full PPR scoring format, which is the first time in this entire channel's history in which I will be talking about a full PPR scoring format in a specific video. So over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about these running backs, sharing with you guys my thought process and opinions, while of course presenting statistics in order to justify these overall rankings. For those of you who are looking for my thoughts on a specific running back, you can travel down to the description. There I have timestamps for every single player. Additionally, if you're down there, do me a favor, click the subscribe button because we're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the season. Of course, if you guys are looking for my 2024 fantasy football draft guide and rankings and all-encompassing rankings, be sure to check out Underdog and, of course, the Patreon. Thank you very much for all the support. But with 50 running backs to cover, let's talk about our number one, Christian McCaffrey, going into the 2024 fantasy football season, where he is on a path to potentially becoming the greatest fantasy football running back of all time, if he is able to complete this season as the number one overall back as we anticipate. Mainly because never in fantasy football over the course of the last 20 years have we seen a full PPR running back finish as the number one on consecutive seasons, but Christian McCaffrey has been the number one overall back in 2 of the last 5 seasons, 2019 and 2023. If he's able to accomplish it in 2024, he'd be the first running back to ever accomplish that. He's coming off of, an incredible last 2 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers. In the last, 32 games that he has played with the organization, including the playoffs, averaging 24.3 fantasy points per game. He has scored 40 touchdowns in those 32 games and an automatic selection at the 1.01. The second running back is, of course, Breece Hall, who last season, once they let him loose and let him completely take over this offense in terms of overall opportunities, getting 20 plus per game, he was able to average 20.02 fantasy points per game in the final 13 games of the season behind a bottom 5 offensive line, and while having Zach Wilson as his starting quarterback and or Trevor Siemian in some of those overall weeks. The New York Jets offense gets a huge upgrade with Aaron Rodgers now being healthy, an incredible improvement in terms of the offensive line, bringing in Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, John Simpson, drafting an offensive lineman within the first round. He is a 3-down capable back that is going to show everyone why he is in this top 3 conversation, taking over and potentially supplanting Christian McCaffrey as the number one back when the 2024 season concludes. The final running back I wanted to mention in regards to the S tier is Bijan Robinson. We've heard all offseason from the offensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons, Zach Robinson, and Bijan himself, that he is going to be utilized like the Christian McCaffrey of their offense. And as long as they're going to continue to give him a lot of opportunity, it's going to lead to success, primarily because of how efficient he has been in his career, and considering the huge upgrade he gets at quarterback. Last season, of course, they had Desmond Ridder and or Taylor Heineke. Now, Kirk Cousins in the fold, going to continue to lead to more touchdowns for Bijan Robinson behind a top 5 run blocking offensive line is a recipe for success. Now, before we continue on, I want to go ahead and remind you guys, if you guys want additional content besides the rankings, you can go ahead and travel down to the description and check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you travel over to the website and use code Andrew when signing up, all you have to do is make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, and you'll get my 2024 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. You'll also be able to claim the first-time deposit offer. Additionally, you'll get rankings sent from my email directly to yours over the course of this month, so regardless of when you're drafting, you're up to date and have an advantage upon your league mates. But that advantage is not going to stop this month. I will be sending you Sunday morning rankings, all encompassing half PPR, full PPR, all the rankings you could possibly ask for every single Sunday for the remainder of the season, so that I can help you set your lineups and capture a 2024 Fantasy Football Championship. For those of you interested, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. And if you're not eligible based on your current location or you've used a code in the past, be sure to go ahead and check out Patreon. All this content and much more available there. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about the A tier, with Jonathan Taylor being our number 4. Last season, once he returned from injury from week 7 through 18, having the full reign of being the starting running back of this offense, averaging 17.56 fantasy points per game in the final 8 games of the season. Last year, Shane Steichen, obviously a new head coach and the primary play caller of the Indianapolis Colts, a former primary play caller of the Philadelphia Eagles in seasons past 2021 and 2022, came into this offense and allowed their running backs to have the 6th most opportunities amongst all teams. This is a very talented back, a former number 1 overall running back in fantasy football just a couple years ago, but obviously he's been dealing with a lot of injuries over the course of the last couple years. In a full healthy season, he is certainly capable of being a top 3 back, and he's one of only 2 running backs since 2018 who's accumulated 20 touchdowns and 2,000 total yards within a given season. Jonathan Taylor has all the talent in the world. He's behind an incredible offensive line, and as this offense continues to surge in the right direction, should be a fantastic fantasy player this season. Number 5, we have Jahmyr Gibbs. Again, I'm beginning to be less and less concerned about his injury. Again, there's a lot of time between when he initially got injured and that Sunday Night Football game to begin week 1 against the Los Angeles Rams. Besides the fact that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have that time to be healthy, he obviously dealt with this kind of an injury last season, only missed 2 weeks. So if in fact they give him the proper rest and they have approached the situation with caution, I'm anticipating Jahmyr Gibbs to be at 100% begin week 1. He's behind a top 5 offensive line in terms of DVOA, run blocking grades, yards before contact across the entirety of the 2023 season. And that offensive line only got better going into 2024. My anticipation is that, of course, Jahmyr Gibbs will continue to improve along with this offensive line. Last season, from weeks 10 through 21, after the bye week, he saw himself far more opportunity within this offense, playing more snaps, and of course, scoring more fantasy points. 16.38 fantasy points per game in a full PPR scoring format. I anticipate to see a year 2 Alvin Kamara-esque jump for Jahmyr Gibbs, similar to the way, of course, Alvin Kamara was utilized years back, in which, yes, he was splitting with Mark Ingram in year 1, but took a huge step in year 2. I expect, of course, Jahmyr Gibbs to be the Alvin Kamara here, and of course, David Montgomery to be the Mark Ingram going into 2024. Number 6, we have Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, again, is an extremely talented back. And despite all of the lack of talent that has surrounded him in New York, he has still been a top 12 running back on multiple occasions. Now you go ahead and plant him right behind a top 5 offensive line in terms of DVOA, yards before contact, run blocking grades. Yes, they lose Kelsey, but they are still very talented. And going into the given season, he's pretty much filling into a backfield that gives their running back 16 to 17 touches per game. Over the course of the last 2 years, Miles Sanders has averaged 16.42 touches per game in 2022. DeAndre Swift last season, 17.73 touches per game. And anytime Saquon Barkley with the New York Giants over the course of the last 2 years has been given 16 or more touches, averaging 20.03 fantasy points per game in a full PPR, I'm anticipating immediate success for him within this offense. I'm going to continue to extend the A tier primarily because we have 50 players to talk about and there isn't as much room on screen as I'd like there to be, but let's talk about Travis Etienne as our number 7, remaining within this A tier. Last season, he was given 325 total touches of opportunity. That is a ridiculous number, especially for the running back that he is. And going into 2023, we did not anticipate him to be able to handle 75% of the running back rushing attempts and 80% of the targets within this backfield. Yet he was able to and averaged 16.61 fantasy points per game. But to begin the year from weeks 1 through 8 was averaging 20.5 fantasy points per game. Obviously, after the bye week, this team went downhill, lost a vast majority of their overall games. The Jaguars offense also experienced many injuries, whether it was offensive line, Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, a lot of players that were missing that certainly did not help the potential upside of Travis Etienne in the back end of the year. I'm expecting him to get back to his peak form and get back into this A-tier conversation. The final player I wanted to mention within the A-tier is Devon Achane because he truly does have the potential to be in this conversation. Last season, amongst all running backs, number 1 in terms of yards per carry, 7.77 average. Number 1 amongst all running backs in terms of yards after contact per attempt, 5.07. I mean, again, he was breaking records last season. He had a game of 51 fantasy points in a full PPR scoring format. In games in which he had 11 or more touches last year, averaging 22.9 fantasy points per game. And even if you exclude the Denver Broncos game in which he scored 51 fantasy points, he was still averaging 18.84 fantasy points per game. I'm expecting a bigger role within this offense considering he's no longer a rookie. Mike McDaniel feels far more confident in giving him a greater workload. And even with Raheem Mostert there, Raheem Mostert's not going to score 20 plus touchdowns once again. Devon Achane should find himself a lot of success in 2024. Let's begin with the B tier, as I've moved Josh Jacobs back into the fold primarily because of the situation of this backfield. Over the course of the last couple years, we have seen LaFleur, the current head coach of the Green Bay Packers and their primary play caller, really utilize this backfield in a split with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Yet Aaron Jones, over the course of the last 5 years, has ranked as the number 2, 5, 12, 9, and 37 overall back. Unfortunately, this last season being the number 37 overall rank, primarily because of the hamstring injuries with his age getting up there. But nonetheless, this offense has been able to support an RB1 on a consistent basis. Josh Jacobs throughout his career, when healthy, has been an RB1 on a consistent basis. So the expectation is that there's a seamless transition from Aaron Jones now to Josh Jacobs, who is a capable 3-down back, with A.J. Dillon having a season-ending injury and MarShawn Lloyd, the rookie running back, still trying to build a rapport within this offense, still is also dealing with an injury throughout training camp. The expectation is that Josh Jacobs should start pretty hot and continue that momentum for the entirety of the season. Number 10, we have Derrick Henry. Speaking of being a RB1 when healthy, that's exactly what Derrick Henry has been. Over the course of the last 5 seasons, he has been a top 10 running back in fantasy football full PPR every single year. Even in the year in which he broke his foot in 2021, prior to the injury, he was literally the number 1 overall back in fantasy and had like a 100-plus point lead over Jonathan Taylor, who ended up being the number 1 back by the end of that season. But this upcoming year should be another consecutive season in which Derrick Henry finishes as a top 10 ranked running back. And regardless of scoring from a half PPR, full PPR, the fact of the matter is that the Baltimore Ravens and their running backs find a lot of success. Last season, amongst all teams in the National Football League, the Baltimore Ravens ranked top 7 in terms of fantasy points to their running backs. Gus Edwards, of course, had the second most red zone rushing touchdowns amongst all running backs last year inside the 5-yard line. He scored 12 of them. So if all those are going to go in the direction of Derrick Henry, which that is the anticipation, he should have himself another great year in a run-first attack with a mobile quarterback and a top 5 schedule. Success is on the horizon. Number 11, we have Isiah Pacheco. You know, it's crazy. The last couple of days, there have been a lot of changes at the running back position, a lot of players joining other teams, a lot of information that is, kind of switching up the rankings. And Isiah Pacheco has suffered from this, mainly because, of course, the signing of Samaje Perine. And that is a little bit scary to me. I do believe that the Samaje Perine signing is primarily because they don't trust Clyde Edwards-Helaire enough. But is that going to potentially impact the value of Isiah Pacheco within the receiving game? I think so. And it's not going to be enough to knock him out of the top 12 conversation, but it is going to keep him as a lower end RB1. We thought that the absence of Jerick McKinnon would certainly elevate Isiah Pacheco because, again, last season without McKinnon, he was averaging over 18 fantasy points per game in a full PPR. But if, in fact, Samaje Perine is going to be a threat for these receptions, again, the expectation was that Isiah Pacheco would be able to handle 80 or 70+% of the overall running back rushing attempts and targets. If that's going to be impacted, that could hurt, but I still expect him to be able to fend off majority of the work and dominate within this backfield. Number 12, the thumbnail of today's episode, it is Kyren Williams. Many of you were wondering where exactly I would have him ranked. Listen, he's coming off of an incredible year. Amongst all running backs last season was number 2 in terms of fantasy points per game on average, putting up over 20 fantasy points per game, and he was incredible. But have you ever heard of a starting running back of a team returning punts? I've never heard of it, at least not recently. I've watched a lot of football over the years. The last time that I can remember a starting back, really, not even a starting back. The last time I remember a running back returning kickoffs or punts who was really integrated within an offense was Alvin Kamara's rookie season, in which he returned kickoffs. But Mark Ingram was the starter that year. But a starting running back of Kyren Williams' overall capabilities, you would think that Sean McVay would try to reduce the volume of hits that he takes, and especially the brutal collisions that happen during special teams. There's a reason why, kickoff and, of course, punts, they're trying to potentially take those out of the game. But nonetheless, there is an expectation that because of this kind of indication that he is going to be returning punts, there's going to be far more utilization out of Blake Corum. I believe that there's a possibility that is going to take place, even though many point toward the idea that, hey, Blake Corum did not, participate in the preseason. That means he's a starter because that's how Sean McVay functions. Well, Ronnie Rivers didn't play in the preseason either, and he's not a starter. So I do expect Kyren Williams to still be the clear and away number 1 running back of this team, but Blake Corum will probably get himself far more utilization than we initially anticipated. Again, just think about last season. Sean McVay is smoke and mirrors. We thought Cam Akers was going to be the guy, but then it was Kyren Williams. This season, we think it's going to be Kyren Williams. It could end up being Blake Corum. We're going to have to wait and see, but still ranked within my top 12. Number 13, we have Rachaad White. I really wanted to rank Rachaad White higher, primarily because, again, he is such a threat within the receiving game. Last season, in terms of unimpeded volume of opportunity, was able to handle 70+% of the running back attempts and targets within this backfield, 336 total touches. This offseason, they did end up drafting Bucky Irving, but again, he is a capable 3-down back, but he's not going to be impeding on the potential upside of Rachaad White. He's a running back that last season, once they went full out with him and continue to give him a lot of utilization out of the backfield, was averaging 17.91 fantasy points per game in the final 12 games of the regular season. Should continue that this season. Number 14 is Alvin Kamara. Yes, within the same tier, Alvin Kamara has proven that he absolutely, in a full PPR scoring format, should be given respect. And even though I have him at number 14 because he is an older running back, he has a higher potential for injury, he really has produced very well over the course of the last couple seasons when healthy. From weeks 4 through 16 last year, averaging 18.84 full PPR fantasy points per game. He is a discount version of Rachaad White, and that's pretty much why I have them right next to one another. They're going to see a very similar level of overall opportunities going in their direction, and even though these two offenses don't have the greatest offensive lines, Alvin Kamara, Rachaad White, both guys that are going to have themselves a lot of upside based on the fact that they're catching the ball potentially 60 to 70 times this year. Number 15, we have James Cook. From weeks 11 through 20 of last year, once Joe Brady took over the offensive coordinator position, James Cook was averaging 15.11 fantasy points per game. And even with Diggs and Davis in the lineup, it was a run-first attack with James Cook and Josh Allen leading the way and scoring all of the touchdowns in the conversation. So that's going to be the question. Are we going to continue to see Josh Allen score a vast majority of those touchdowns, considering he's coming off of a year in which he scored 15 rushing touchdowns within this offense, a vast majority of them coming within the red zone? If in fact the design runs and the scrambles are going to continue to go towards Josh Allen, then I don't feel as confident ranking James Cook higher, even though he is anticipated to see potentially 19 to 20 plus touches per game, which again makes me very comfortable having him as my RB1 on my team, despite being the number 15 ranked running back. I still do believe his overall upside is capped based on the quarterback contributions of Josh Allen within the red zone. Again, Josh Allen has scored over 50% of the rushing touchdowns within this offense over the course of the last 4 seasons. So as long as he's there and he's going to be a threat scoring, 7+ per season over the course of the last 4 years, it's definitely going to impact the potential ceiling of James Cook. Number 16, we have Joe Mixon, who's coming off of 3 consecutive years of being a top 12 fantasy running back. Last season, averaging 15.7 fantasy points per game as a starting running back of the Cincinnati Bengals. Whether or not Joe Burrow was in the lineup, finding himself a lot of success. What Joe Mixon provides is a lot of PPR upside. Over the course of the last 3 seasons, averaging over 4 receptions per game. And if they expect to utilize him in that capacity, fantastic. Now that you have a healthy offensive line within the Houston Texans offense, they should be able to run the ball early and often, unlike they were able to do early last season for the first 6 weeks of the season. Whether it was Dameon Pierce or Devin Singletary, no one was finding success. So with a healthy offense, Bobby Sloak as the offensive coordinator, and so many weapons with Diggs, Dell, Collins, and Schultz, there should be some light boxes for Joe Mixon this upcoming season. Number 17, we have Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, during his 14 healthy games last year, was able to handle 77% of the running back rushing attempts and 52% of the running back targets. Late in the year, after he, of course, returned from his injury, we did see far more utilization of Zach Charbonnet, but that was with a different coaching staff, a different offensive coordinator. Now, going into 2024, there is an expectation that the new OC, Ryan Grubb, is going to turn Kenneth Walker into a 3-down back. And if he's capable of doing so, Kenneth Walker can absolutely deliver. Last season from weeks 1 through 10, as pretty much a 3-down back, in the healthy games he played, averaging 15.0 fantasy points per game in a full PPR scoring format. The expectation is that as a full 3-down back of this offense, an offense that should elevate in comparison to where they were last year, made some improvements on the offensive line, are getting healthy. Kenneth Walker, honestly, a solid potential option as a high-end RB2, or if you're in a desperate situation, could end up being your RB1, and I wouldn't even be mad about it. Number 18, we have David Montgomery. Now, David Montgomery, very similar to Jahmyr Gibbs, is benefiting from the fact that he's a part of an incredible offense that is scoring a lot of touchdowns behind an offensive line that is top 5 last season in terms of DVOA, run blocking grades, yards before contact. They improved bringing in Zeitler as one of their offensive guards. And last season, even with splitting majority of the overall touches with Jahmyr Gibbs between weeks 10 through 21, we still saw David Montgomery averaging about 15 touches per game and 13.58 fantasy points per game in a full PPR scoring format. In the final 12 games of his season, only scored less than 10 fantasy points once. He is a consistent 10 plus fantasy points per game, and he is the most valuable handcuff in fantasy football, especially considering, of course, the injury scare that Jahmyr Gibbs had just a couple weeks back. Number 19, we have Aaron Jones, who jumps within the conversation of the overall ranks, primarily because he is such a talented receiving back. And over the course of the last couple seasons has proven that he can be a top 12 fantasy back. I mean, 2019, 2020, 21, and 22 was a top 12 back in every single one of those years. So despite the fact that he is changing homes and is now with a division rival with the Minnesota Vikings, the expectation is that there's still juice left in the tank. Again, Aaron Jones, the final 5 games of his Green Bay Packers career, was averaging 19.26 full PPR fantasy points per game. He's a capable 3-down back, and considering the fact that they do have a great offensive line and Sam Darnold at quarterback, the expectation would be that checkdowns may be a far more common expectation within this offense, and potentially even running the ball in order to protect Sam Darnold could be a way that they approach the early season, considering how many injuries this offense has already gone ahead and impacted themselves with during the preseason. Number 20, another one of these receiving backs, it is DeAndre Swift. In a full PPR over the course of the last 3 seasons, has not ranked below RB22. So if he's always been a top 24 running back, then why not once again within a honestly pretty good offense? I mean, in terms of the fact that he's the de facto number 1, there's not really a conversation just like there was last year. Last year, we didn't know, is it going to be Gainwell? Is it going to be Penny? Is it going to be him? Going into this year, regardless of what happens, it is going to be him as the number 1 back. With a new offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron, who has supported Kenneth Walker as a top 20 back in each of the last 2 seasons, on top of the fact that this is a great offensive line in terms of run blocking, you have all these weapons with a new quarterback. The Chicago Bears offense should be in line for the most success they have seen in many of years, and DeAndre Swift should be benefiting from that, whether it's on the ground or through the air. Moving on to our number 21, we have James Conner. I have a lot of trust in James Conner. When he is healthy, he dominates. I mean, it's just a simple fact. Last season, in the 12 healthy games he played, he was averaging 16.41 fantasy points per game. Despite the fact that, of course, he missed 4 games, was still a top 20 back in terms of overall total points scored in a full PPR scoring format. So the question is, can James Conner stay healthy? He's never been able to do it throughout his entire career. But if in fact you're able to get James Conner, you could also invest in Trey Benson just to go ahead and have his handcuff. But I do believe even if James Conner was to miss 2 to 4 games this year, he's going to return and reclaim the starting position. Because there is guys like Trey Benson and Amari DeMercado that are going to be fighting each other for overall touches in the absence of James Conner. So it will give James Conner the opportunity that as soon as he comes back, he's immediately the RB1 once again and should continue to find success. And imagine a year in which he doesn't get injured with the improvements that this offense has made. Honestly, top 20 isn't out of the realm of possibility, if not better. Number 22, we have Najee Harris. Again, Najee Harris needs to be given a lot more credit than people do give him. And I'm here to just go ahead and champion Najee Harris, primarily based on the overall contributions that he has had over the last couple of years. And quite frankly, if you end up getting him as your RB2, expect a slow start because, again, this is a new offensive coordinator. It's a new quarterback. The offensive line is being reshuffled, but eventually he's going to find himself, potential success. So if you want, you can avoid Najee Harris now and trade for him after the first 4 weeks of the season because typically after that, he finds himself a lot of success. In 2022, from weeks 6 through 18, 14.32 fantasy points per game. And in 2023, from week 7 through 18, 13.51 fantasy points per game in a full PPR. So maybe we want to go ahead and wait, but there is upgrades to quarterback, upgrades to the OC. This is going to be a run-first attack, and Najee Harris should be getting the vast majority of those touches. Number 23, we have Rhamondre Stevenson. This is the issue with Rhamondre Stevenson. He is still going to be a part of a dysfunctional offense, but last season, a part of one of the most dysfunctional offenses in the National Football League, from weeks 1 through 12, when healthy, was the number 24 overall back in terms of full PPR scoring and was averaging 12.98 fantasy points per game. So he still puts up great numbers despite the fact that the quarterback play, the offensive line play isn't great. But they do have a new offensive coordinator in Alex Van Pelt. He's going to be running the offense entirely, and they're going to make this team a run-first attack in order to protect Drake May, who is expected to potentially be the starting quarterback if, in fact, we do not see Jacoby Brissett suiting up because of the injury that he sustained in the preseason. We know that he has been a former RB1 back in 2022. He has 3-down back efficiency, whether it's on the ground or through the air. He is a decent investment for someone who's being drafted far later in drafts because people don't like the idea of having the clear 3-down back of a team that, yes, may not be able to score as many touchdowns, but in a full PPR, the receiving work that he gets is going to lead him to the promised land. Number 24, speaking of receiving work leading you to the promised land, we have Tony Pollard, who should be the lead back of a Brian Callahan-led offense. Brian Callahan, a former offensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals for the last couple seasons, has helped Joe Mixon be a top 12 running back in each of those 3 years. And even though last season he didn't give Joe Mixon a whole lot of opportunities, he still ended up finishing as the number 8 overall running back. So if in fact we have Tony Pollard as the clear current RB1 of this team, yes, people are saying there's a 1A and 1B, but the 1A is clearly Tony Pollard. In their last preseason game, with the first team offense on the first drive, Tony Pollard never came out of the game. Tyjae Spears did not play in that first drive. So if in fact we're going to see Tony Pollard, who has proven that he could be a top 15 back in 2022 and in 2023, have himself a lot more opportunity than we anticipate, should clearly be a top 24 back. Number 25, we have Raheem Mostert. Yes, last season, the primary catalyst to his success was the fact that he was highly efficient, 4.84 yards per carry, number 9 amongst all running backs, and 3.4 yards after contact per attempt, number 10 amongst all running backs, with a minimum of 50 rushing attempts. With all that efficiency, great. But then he was also able to score himself 21 touchdowns. And going into this upcoming year, I don't anticipate that to be the case. Yes, the Miami Dolphins gave their running backs the 5th most opportunities amongst all teams in the National Football League last year. As long as your backfield is giving your running backs top 10 opportunities from 2018 to 2023, there is a 100% success rate of being able to produce 2 top 24 running backs. That is why I have Raheem Mostert just outside of the top 24 because I do anticipate a huge surge from Devon Achane this year. But Raheem Mostert, again, even despite his age, highly efficient, in a great offense, and should be able to find himself a lot of success in fantasy football. Number 26, we have Zamir White, who is the clear and away RB1 and the 3-down back in my expectation of this offense. Sure, we're going to see a couple stints of Alexander Madison, but this offense is going to give Zamir White a lot of opportunities. I mean, Josh Jacobs, over the course of the last 5 seasons as the lead back of this offense, has continued to be an RB1 when healthy. He's been able to be a top 18 back in terms of fantasy points per game on average over the course of the last 5 years. So why not Zamir White? I mean, last season, in the stint in which he was the clear and away number 1 from weeks 15 through 18 in the absence of Josh Jacobs, in a full PPR, averaging 15.18 fantasy points per game. Very similar to the numbers that we witnessed guys like James Cook, Joe Mixon, and Kenneth Walker produced last year, yet we are getting Zamir White at a discount primarily because we're not 100% certain as to what his receiving utilization is going to look like. But if in fact this offensive line is fully healthy, there is a very good chance that Zamir White can be a breakout candidate this year, a player that doesn't have very many touches throughout his entire career because, again, he has played behind Josh Jacobs. We know that the head coach of this team, Antonio Pierce, last season was very adamant about giving his RB1 20-plus touches per game, and Zamir White is certainly a bigger back that is going to be able to handle that kind of a workload and obviously lead us to fantasy success this upcoming season. Number 27, we have Javonte Williams. I've slowly moved Javonte Williams up in the absence of Samaje Perine. Like I mentioned just a couple videos ago in terms of potential league winners, Javonte Williams all offseason, there's been a fear based on his lack of potential production last year and the fact that this was a running back by committee situation that once again it is going to take place. But since Samaje Perine is out, considering he plays behind a top 10 run blocking offensive line and this backfield utilizes their running backs within the receiving game so highly, in fact, Sean Payton, Joe Lombardi, their offenses typically give their running backs 130 to 150 targets per season. Last season, the Denver Broncos were number 1 amongst all teams in terms of total targets and, of course, receptions at the running back position. If, in fact, we're going to give Javonte Williams the full reign of this backfield, yes, a little bit of utilization for Jaleel McLaughlin, but if the vast majority is going toward Javonte Williams, he certainly has the capabilities of being a breakout candidate and potential league winner, another season removed from his ACL injury. Number 28. We have Jerome Ford, another one of these players that I really like going into this season because what he was able to accomplish in the absence of, Nick Chubb last season from weeks 2 through 17, again, averaging 13.63 fantasy points per game in a full PPR, all while throughout that span of time from weeks 3 through 17, a guy like Kareem Hunt came into the offense off the couch and was getting the ball 10 times per game on average. So with Nick Chubb going to the PUP, the physically unable to perform, missing the first 4 games of the season at very least, if in fact we may be in a situation in which Nick Chubb, considering the severity of his injury, is going to miss potentially the first 6 games of the season and then going to need a 4-week ramp up, for more than half the season, Jerome Ford is going to be the guy. And even with Jerome Ford being the guy last season and Kareem Hunt getting 10 touches per game in his back pocket, Kareem Hunt was able to finish as RB41 in 15 games played. So there is a lot of value to being the starting running back or at least being a contributor of the backfield of the Cleveland Browns. They also recently cut D'Onta Foreman, which makes the value of Jerome Ford continue to grow, especially considering he is the primary lead receiving back of this offense. Number 29, speaking of receiving backs, we begin the tear of third down backs that continue to find a lot of success. We have Austin Ekeler, one of the most decorated receiving backs of all time, formerly in 2021 and 2022, a top 2 fantasy back in a full PPR. He has Cliff Kingsbury as his new offensive coordinator as he joins the Washington Commanders. In Cliff Kingsbury's career, he always has liked to utilize a receiving back when he has an opportunity of doing so. In 2020, with the Arizona Cardinals, he turned Chase Edmonds into the number 25 overall back in a full PPR. In 2021, Chase Edmonds, the number 34 overall back. We meet in the middle to find ourselves with Austin Ekeler as our potential number 29 this season. Number 30, we have Jaylen Warren, who we're hearing a lot of great things about going into this year, at training camp, but then he unfortunately had a hamstring injury. But the expectation is that he is expected to play in week 1 and that he is on the right track. Last season, averaging 11.55 fantasy points per game is a perfect flex option for those of you who are in need of a running back that is going to get themselves a lot of receiving utilization. Last season, in 14 of his 17 games, getting 3 or more receptions. So he's certainly going to find himself a lot of value there. This offense gets a huge upgrade at quarterback, offensive coordinator, and hopefully if Jaylen Warren is healthy, he can certainly continue to be an RB3 with upside within this offense. Speaking of third down backs, we continue with Tyjae Spears, who will have a role very similar to what Austin Ekeler and, of course, Jaylen Warren is going to experience this season. Last year, Tyjae Spears finished as RB34 overall with 100 rushing attempts and 52 receptions. And the expectation is that he's going to get more touches, but he's still going to be the RB2 of this offense, and he's going to come in sparingly. He'll steal a couple touchdowns. He'll get himself a couple big plays. He is an explosive playmaker. It's just a matter of he is still going to be the RB2, and therefore, because of that, lesser valued in comparison to Tony Pollard, but still a very valuable back for those of you who are playing in a multi-flex league, can utilize him every single week. Number 32, we have Bijan Robinson Jr., who again has himself a lot of potential upside. Last season, In the healthy games between weeks 1 through 12 prior to his injury, 14.22 full PPR fantasy points per game. Cliff Kingsbury being his offensive coordinator and the fact that they have a rookie quarterback leads me to believe that they're going to be running the ball a pretty good volume of times. I mean, again, Cliff Kingsbury back in 2020 was able to support Kenyon Drake as a top 16 running back. James Conner was a top 6 running back in 2021 within a Cliff Kingsbury offense. So the clear RB1 of this team finds themselves a lot of success, while, of course, guys like Austin Eckler also find success. So if this offense for the Washington Commanders is significantly better than what we anticipate, Brian Robinson Jr. should be able to destroy the number 32 number. Otherwise, a solid overall RB3 going into the year. Number 33 to close out the F tier, we have Devin Singletary, who should be seeing himself the vast majority of overall touches in the absence of course, Saquon Barkley. There has been a lot of chatter in regards to Tyron Tracy taking over some of the receiving utilization of this offense, considering he's coming out of college as a former receiver and is being utilized as a running back. Something very similar to what Antonio Gibson presented in seasons past, but Devin Singletary knows Brian Daboll. He was obviously playing underneath Brian Daboll for the Buffalo Bills from 2019 to 2021. Throughout those seasons, Devin Singletary finishes RB 32, 31, and 18. So my expectation is that considering he is playing in an offense that is honestly not going to find themselves a lot of success within the running game, considering their offensive line and the fact that they're the New York Giants, Devin Singletary will have his hands full of opportunities, but the efficiency may not be there. Number 34 and number 35, we have Chase Brown and Zach Moss. Look, the expectation is that Chase Brown in a full PPR should be a more valuable back. The thing is, we don't know who is going to be the clear-cut number one come week 1. And if, in fact, they want to go ahead and make this a 1A, 1B conversation and both of them are going to suffer, they're still going to have enough value to be top 36 valued players. But at this current moment in time, I cannot 100% designate, hey, Chase Brown is going to beat Zach Moss or vice versa. So we're going to leave them in this conversation and just hope that we draft the right one going into 2024. Number 36, we have Gus Edwards, who is the clear and away number 1 running back of the Los Angeles Chargers offense. You know, in the last couple of years, we have seen very old running backs somehow, some way come out of nowhere and finish within the top of the conversation. Specifically, Raheem Mostert last year. A couple years back, we had Cordero Patterson finish as an RB1. And Gus Edwards going into his year 29 season, coming off of multiple injuries, but now rejoins his former offensive coordinator from Baltimore, Greg Roman, is going to be the clear number 1 running back of a run-first offense in Los Angeles. I mean, over the course of his career, anytime he's been given 10 or more touches, he's averaging over 11 fantasy points per game on average in a full PPR scoring format. On top of the fact that J.K. Dobbins, again, is coming off of an Achilles injury, should lead to Gus Edwards getting a lot of touches within this offense. Number 37, speaking of injuries, Jonathon Brooks is coming off of an injury himself. Of course, tore his ACL last season in college. Of course, he's a rookie running back, but it is expected that once he, in fact, returns from injury off of the PUP list by week 4, there is going to be a slow ramp up. And by the time we get to potentially week 7, week 8, Jonathon Brooks should end up being the number 1 overall running back of this offense. And what we have seen from Dave Canales, the current play caller and head coach of the Carolina Panthers, formerly an OC of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year and a quarterback's coach of the Seattle Seahawks in 2022, is that his offenses typically revolve around getting his wide receivers a lot of opportunity and leading to his running back success. I mean, guys like Kenneth Walker in 2022, a top 16 back. Last season, Rachaad White, a top 8 fantasy running back. So why not Jonathon Brooks, who they felt so confident in drafting, they made him the first running back off of the board in the 2024 NFL Draft. Number 38, speaking of running backs coming off of the board, in terms of rookies, we have Blake Corum. I've moved up Blake Corum a lot. I moved him from 45 to 38. And quite frankly, I just want to put it out there. There's going to be a lot more opportunities for Blake Corum than we probably anticipated. And that's why I've moved Kyren Williams from 7 down to 12. But in this circumstance, he is still going to be a player that has the potential of being an RB3 flex option, but is going to need himself receiving utilization and or touchdown upside. The thing is, the Los Angeles running backs don't really dump off the ball to their running backs. So that in itself already hurts Blake Corum. But if, in fact, the Los Angeles Rams offensive line and Sean McVay are fully in on running the ball more than they ever have over the course of the last couple of seasons, considering the talent that they have at running back and considering how much, of course, talent they have at Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, and, of course, Cooper Kupp, there may be a system in which maybe, just putting it out there, what if Kyren Williams and Blake Corum end up being this year's Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery? It's always a potential opportunity there. It's a non-zero chance, considering the track record of Sean McVay, what happened last season with Cam Akers, all the smoke and mirrors. We can't 100% say how this is going to break down, but we know there's going to be a lot more Blake Corum within this lineup than we originally anticipated as the offseason began. Number 39, we have Ezekiel Elliott. The reason why I've moved down Zeke is because, of course, they signed Dalvin Cook. And even though Dalvin Cook was washed last year, Zeke is still going to have more competition for touches within this backfield. Zeke last season was good. From weeks 13 through 18, averaging 15.9 full PPR fantasy points per game. Incredible numbers. And if Zeke still has it, and he's able to stay healthy, again, he's played 49 of the last 51 games of his career, he's going to get himself the vast majority of the red zone work. And if this offense can maintain a top 10 standing in terms of points scored on a weekly basis, there's an expectation that Zeke should still be of value, but will be splitting a lot of touches with Dalvin and Dowdle. Number 40, we have Nick Chubb. Again, he's coming off of a brutal injury. He is on the PUP list. And the reason why I have him far lower than a guy like Jonathon Brooks is because he is an older running back. He has dealt with severe injuries like this in the past, and considering how much mileage his body has in his legs. So going into this upcoming season, if he's able to return from the injury, ramp up accordingly, and get himself within the mix of this backfield, him and Jerome Ford will split. And even last season, with Kareem Hunt getting himself 10 touches per game between weeks 3 through 17, was able to be the number 41 overall back in a full PPR. Nick Chubb could be in that conversation if he's not able to return to being 100% Nick Chubb, which, again, is not the expectation. The expectation is that maybe he gets to being 75, 80% of the normal Nick Chubb, which 10 points per game could be good after he misses potentially 4 to 6 weeks. 41, we have Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard, again, last season, from weeks 6 through 18, as the clear number 1 back of this team, averaging 12.45 fantasy points per game. For those of you who draft a guy like Jonathon Brooks, it may be smart to go ahead and pick up Chuba Hubbard, because in the absence of Jonathon Brooks, Chuba Hubbard is going to get himself the vast majority of the 3-down workload. And when he's able to do so in an offense that is led by Dave Canales, there's going to be a lot of value there. So again, he's going to have himself a lot of touches early. He's also still going to be in the mix as the season progresses, even when Jonathon Brooks comes back. So therefore, he will have value. Number 42, we have Jaleel McLaughlin. Last season, in games in which he was given 10 or more touches, averaging 14.3 fantasy points per game. In the absence of Samaje Perine, it leaves up potentially 50-plus receptions vacated now. We know that this offense loves to target their running backs 130 to 150 times. They were number 1 amongst all teams in the National Football League last year in terms of running back targets and receptions. So if, in fact, they decide to utilize Javonte Williams as a Mark Ingram, and of course Jaleel McLaughlin as a Darren Sproles, Alvin Kamara, something that Sean Payton has done in the past with other running backs, could be even more valuable than number 42 in a full PPR. Number 43, we have J.K. Dobbins. Again, he is in an offense that, with a core starter being Gus Edwards, is expected to still be the number 2 overall back. But considering he's coming off of the Achilles, a couple seasons back the ACL, the expectation is that he's still on this team because there is still something left in his legs. They wouldn't have him on roster if, in fact, they knew he wasn't going to be able to pull it. Greg Roman is familiar with him. He's coached him back in his days, of course, with the Baltimore Ravens. The expectation is that J.K. Dobbins should see somewhere between 100 to 150 total touches this year, and if he's able to do so, should be of value, especially if he's able to vulture some touchdowns. Number 44, we have Zach Charbonnet, who late last season was able to take over the 3rd down role and, of course, get himself a lot of 2-minute drill utilization within this offense. If, in fact, there is a possibility in which he also gets a couple touches in order to keep Kenneth Walker III fresh, he should continue to be a top potential 45 running back, just like he was last season. If, in fact, Kenneth Walker goes down, a pretty high upside overall running back in terms of being a handcuff with value. Number 45, speaking of being a handcuff, that's what Ty Chandler should be. Unless this offense wants to utilize Ty Chandler in the way in which the Green Bay Packers utilized A.J. Dillon to be able to spell someone like Aaron Jones once, in fact, he needs a breather. So going into this year, the expectation is that Ty Chandler should get himself more utilization. There's a reason why the organization feels so comfortable utilizing him as that RB2, but vast majority of the touches are going in the direction of Aaron Jones, and until Aaron Jones is going to miss time, Ty Chandler really won't have much value outside of being a handcuff. Number 46, speaking of being a handcuff, one of the more valuable ones that may not have immediate value in terms of being a starter every week, but can sit on your bench and could end up being a league winner if, in fact, an injury takes place, is Tyler Algier. We know that he can be a dominant fantasy running back. We've seen that a couple years back. Last season got himself a split between him and Bijan Robinson, but even though we have heard this offseason that they plan on utilizing him, the fact of the matter is Bijan Robinson is extremely talented and far more suited for the offense that they're going to put together in Atlanta. Therefore, I expect far less touches for Tyler Algier this year, but again, a top 3 handcuff considering the running back he's associated with. Number 47, speaking of top 3 handcuffs, we have someone like Jordan Mason. Elijah Mitchell is out for the entire season. Again, Elijah Mitchell has never stayed healthy in his entire career. Therefore, Jordan Mason is the handcuff to the number one running back in fantasy football. If you have Christian McCaffrey, please draft Jordan Mason. Please have your handcuff on roster so that if anything happens, you're prepared, especially considering Christian McCaffrey's calf injury he's been dealing with this month. Moving on to number 48, speaking of handcuffs, we have Trey Benson, rookie running back of the Arizona Cardinals. Considering the fact that James Conner has never had a full healthy season, the expectation is that Trey Benson could end up taking over in the absence of James Conner. If you're a James Conner manager, the idea of getting Trey Benson, depending on where that investment ends up, taking place, if it is worth it in the later rounds, go for it. Outside of that, if you're drafting James Conner, you should be confident enough that regardless of the fact that he is out with injury, Trey Benson will end up, being replaced once he returns from injury. But again, definitely an insurance policy there at running back. Number 49, we have Ray Davis, who was drafted and is going to be joining an offense that, again, is a run-first attack. Last season, from weeks 11 and on into the NFL playoffs, the running backs of this offense were getting about 27 rushing attempts per game. Obviously, we anticipate Ray Davis to be able to jump over guys like Ty Johnson and really be the RB2 right behind James Cook. So as long as the opportunities are going to be there, and this is going to be a run-first attack, Ray Davis is going to have himself a couple opportunities here and there, but of course, be a handcuff. The final running back I wanted to mention to close out today's video is MarShawn Lloyd. Very similar to, all these other running backs we talked about. He joins an offense that in the past has used A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. And if in fact MarShawn Lloyd gets healthy, maybe they want to utilize him far more and have him be the A.J. Dillon of this offense, considering A.J. Dillon is out with a neck injury for the remainder of the season, and have a little bit of a 1-2 split between Josh Jacobs and Lloyd. If that takes place, it's going to be further down in the year, primarily because, again, MarShawn Lloyd has been dealing with an injury all of training camp, and Josh Jacobs is clearing away the RB1. All right, guys, that's going to cover it for my top 50 running backs going into 2024 in a full PPR scoring format. If you enjoyed today's content, click the like button down below. Good luck in your drafts this weekend. Tomorrow, I'll be talking about my top 50 wide receivers at a full PPR capacity. But until next time, of course, be sure to subscribe, click the like button down below, check out Underdog Fantasy using code Andrew, or check out the Patreon to get my 2024 fantasy football draft guide, the rankings, and of course, rankings for the remainder of the season. Thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.